Hello, and welcome back to the sailing vessel Silverheels. As you can see, the sailing season is over. We put the boat on the trailer and towed it home about a week ago. It's mid-October currently. But the end of sailing season does not mean the end of activity related to the boat. It's the beginning of project season. So I have a number of projects that I want to do between now and next spring when the boat goes back in the water. We're going to start on some of those now. So the first thing we did when we got the boat home to try to get ready for all this work is we took all of the sailing gear off the boat. So dock lines, fenders, pots, pans, cups, the whole galley. All that came off. In addition to all the cushions, cockpit cushions, settee cushions, and the V-berth mattresses. They're all off the boat and safely stored where they won't get hurt. So with that done, I could go on to the next step, which was a little more invasive. So I pretty much stripped out most of the interior of the boat. That only involved removing screws. So you just kept removing screws wherever you found them until a piece would come out, and then you move on to the next piece, and so on. Took a couple hours probably. We do a large part of what we have planned will involve some reworking of the galley configuration. And there's also some work that we might do up in the head area and under the V-berth. But we'll describe those in more detail as we go along. The first project is going to be the floor. The old floor was a piece of 3/4 inch pressure treated plywood covered with some carpeting. And my main objection is that the carpeting was difficult to keep clean, and also that it wasn't easily movable, so you couldn't easily get to the access to the bilge, so you couldn't check the bilge for water. So we're going to replace it with some oak, and I had initially envisioned that the oak strips would run fore and aft, but since the supports run fore and aft, the path of least resistance is to run the boards side to side, port to starboard, or starboard to port. So that's what we'll do. Time to get started. Behind me is the raw material for our flooring project. You might have thought we had a trip to Home Depot in mind, but in fact that would be too easy. We're going to take rough sawn oak boards and make them into flooring. So I had a few oak trees taken down a few years ago, and I hired a guy with a sawmill to mill those into boards for me. And I liked that process so much, I later bought my own sawmill, and for 5 years ran a portable sawmill business. But I didn't mill this. This is still left from the other guy. So I've got more of these boards in the shop where they've been stored for a while, and with a dehumidifier running, so to drop the moisture level in them down just a bit further than what they'll reach out here. For reference, here's the original floor. It was 3 pieces of plywood, as it was. This is a center piece with a slot cut for the centerboard, and it's upside down because of those 2 black supports that are on it. But forward of that is the access panel, which you couldn't get to because of the rug, and then of course there's the hole for the table support. The outer piece was one whole piece. The dimensions of this are 43 inches wide by a hair over 6 feet long, and amazingly it's a rectangle. All the edges are straight, which is pretty unheard of on a sailboat, but that's the way it is. I was unable to figure out how to get the outer piece, the two sides, out as one unit, so I ended up having to saw through it at the forward end to get it out as two sections. So we've picked out a few boards that I think will give us enough material for the flooring project. These boards are about 12 feet long, which makes them really hard to manage inside my small shop. So the first thing we'll do is cut them to rough length. The widest boards that we'll need, the longest boards that we'll need will be 43 inches for the forward section of the floor, and back where it splits around the centerboard trunk, there are about 20-inch pieces. So what I think we'll do is divide these roughly into thirds and trim off some of the waste at the ends, and try to come up with something about 44 inches just to give us a little flexibility. So that's step one. Next we'll make sure that all of these pieces have one straight edge. By the way, if you'd like to know more about this machine I'm using, I've done a whole series of videos about it. It's a Minimax CU300, and that's on another different channel I have for my home and gardens, and I'll put up a link for that. Our next step will be to rip these pieces to a little bit over their final target width. The next step is to flatten one face of each of these boards using the jointer. Now that one face has been made flat on all these boards, we'll take them back to the jointer and joint one edge to make sure it's straight and 90 degrees to the face. Next, we're going to use the planer to bring our boards to their finish width. And we're going to use the planer again to mill the boards to close to their final thickness, and the final thickness will be 3/4 of an inch. So after several passes through the planer, we've got these boards down to just a little thicker than 3/4 of an inch. And I'm going to move on to a different process now before we get it down to that final dimension. Specifically, I want to roughen up one surface of all of these boards. I think it was in a Lineary Pardee book, where I first came across the notion that the best surface for a cabin sole is slightly roughened lumber. The benefit is you get better traction, and traction is always good. So I'm going to, for each of these boards, I'm going to pick which side I want to show facing up, and I'm going to roughen up that side with a light touch of the belt sander, and then we'll come back to the planer and we'll plane material off the back side of each board until we get it down to the 3/4 inch target. So our floorboards now have a slightly textured surface. I used 80 grit sandpaper for that, and that gave me a surface that I thought was appropriately textured. And I've decided not to reduce the thickness of the boards down to 3/4 of an inch. They're about 7/8 now, and so long as they're all the same thickness, it doesn't matter exactly what they are. There's just no need to take it down any further. So the next step in the process would be to put a tongue and groove on each board. All of our flooring pieces now have tongues and grooves, well, except for one. This could be done either way, but I've decided somewhat arbitrarily that the tongues will go forward in the cabin, and that means that the most forward piece will need a groove to accept a tongue, but it doesn't need a tongue on the other end. There's nothing for it to go into, so we've got the piece for that. So I believe we're done with milling, and we can now move on to assembly and eventually installation. My initial concept for this floor was that I would fasten each board individually to the stringers. But I'm giving that some more thought. I decided that instead my approach is going to be I'm going to build several panels, and the panels will go into the boat as a unit. Which will mean they'll be easier to take in and out if I need to get under the floor again, and that fewer screws will show in the cabin. So my current thinking is there will be 3 panels, one of which will go forward of the center board, so those boards will be the full width of the cabin, and then a piece after that, one port and one starboard on each side of the center board. So those boards will be shorter. Okay, so it's time to do a little assembly. So here is our first assembly, as I said, for the forward section of flooring. And we've got 11 boards here, and as I said, they will run full width of the cabin, kind of. As you may recall, there's the bilge access door that's here in the center. So in fact, there's 5 boards here that will have to be sawn into 3 sections to accommodate that. Basically, these boards are going to be held together with these pieces, which in woodworking terms would be called cleats. Not to be confused, of course, with nautical cleats. But so we'll put a screw through the cleat into the floorboard, one screw for each board for each cleat. And we'll do something similar with shorter cleats to hold the bilge access door together as a unit. So the short cleats for the access panel have been attached to the 5 boards that will make up the access panel. And what I'm going to do now is take just this section over to the table saw and make the cuts that will form the access panel. And that way I don't have to line up a bunch of cuts. They'll just line up automatically. So we're set up and just about to make the cuts that will create the access hatch. But fortunately I had an epiphany just before making those cuts, not just after, which is I want to put these boards back together in the same configuration they are now. So the grains will line up and make the hatches non-obvious as possible. So having thought of that, I've numbered the boards 1 through 5 in the center and 1 through 5 starboard on this side and 1 through 5 port on this side, so I can put everything back together in the same way it's coming apart. The other little detail we're going to take care of right now is to saw the tongue off the forwardmost board, because we wouldn't be able to get the access panel out otherwise. So I want to use the access hatch piece as a guide for positioning these side pieces. And to do that I have to immobilize it. So I'm going to use a couple of scrap pieces of cleat and essentially clamp it to the forwardmost floorboard. So with the bilge access panel clamped firmly in place, what we'll do now is take a scrap piece of countertop laminate, like Formica, which is about 1/16 of an inch thick, and we'll insert it into the gap along the side of the panel, and then we'll slide all the side boards up against it, which will hopefully give us a nice straight edge along the side of the opening, and will provide a suitable gap space between the main floor and the access panel. Now we can go ahead and secure all the floorboards to the cleats, inner cleats, then we'll remove the clamps and do the same with the outer cleats. So assembly of this panel is almost complete. Let's turn it over and take a look. Well, not too shabby, I'd say. I will have to do some sanding to clean up these edges. There is some irregularity between boards on the surface, so we'll probably take the belt sander to that again. And we'll need to, well, maybe we won't. I thought we'd need to shim that or sand that a little to get the door to come in and out smoothly, but that seems fine. We will have to install this pull, and we want that flush to the floor. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do that yet. So it turns out that installing this little bit of hardware was more complicated than I hoped it would be. So, and truth be known, you could just drill a finger hole through the access panel, and that would work just as well and be perfectly acceptable, I think. But having come this far, I am going to go ahead and use this. The issue here is that to mount this flush, we need a variety of recesses in the wood. The first one we need is a rectangular recess, the dimensions of full dimensions of the piece, and the thickness of the outer flange. And so to accommodate that, we've made a jig where this opening is the right size, the same size as our piece. And we're going to use a router bit with a guide bearing at the top, and we'll use the jig and the piece itself to set the proper depth of cut for the router bit, and that's pretty straightforward. But we need further recesses for the finger pull area. Needs to be accommodated, and the hinge area. Since the finger pull is round, that suggests a drill bit is a good solution for that. So that's a 1 1/8 inch Forstner bit for this particular bit of hardware. And the hinge area really needs a square recess, but a round one will work as well. So we have a 3/4 inch Forstner bit that we're going to use to accommodate that. But these holes need to be positioned rather precisely, so we've made another jig to accommodate that. So we'll clamp this to the workpiece in the appropriate location, and then this will serve as a guide. But the first thing we need to do is to lay out the location of the piece on the access panel, and we're going to center that side to side and front to back in the forwardmost board of the panel. We've marked out the location of the pull on the access panel, and we're going to do this work with the panel in place in the floor, and we've used a couple of wedges to immobilize it. We've lined up our drilling template, and now we can go ahead and drill our recess holes. So it's hard to gauge exactly how deep they need to be, but it doesn't really matter at this point. Once this hole has been started, it can be used as a reference then, and I can make it deeper easily. Now we've got our rectangular template mounted. We just did that by sighting down through the hole and lining it up with the pencil marks below, and then double checking to make sure it's square to the front edge of the floor. And we can go ahead and use the router to route out the rectangular recess. Of course, the router bit will leave round corners on the recess, so we did have to come back with chisels to clean that up a little. And I'll have to admit that my templates were not perfect, and I did have to do a little more cleanup underneath to get the pull to sit flush, but we're there now. So a couple of screws, and we'll use the hardware itself to guide us in placing in the screw holes, and we're home. One of the last things we have to do before we take this panel out to the boat is to cut it to width. As I mentioned way back, the piece of plywood flooring that I took out was 43 inches wide, and I went out and measured again to confirm that, and then I cut a test piece using this stop and took that out to the boat to triple check and make sure that 43 inches is the appropriate dimension. So we're going to first trim one side and then the other, and I established the lines for the cuts by measuring out from the center. So the access panel will remain centered and the cleats will remain in the correct positions to avoid the stringers. I hope. There's our floor temporarily installed for a test fit, and it fits very well. There is a slight gap way up in the starboard forward corner, but that's up under the galley counter toe kick and shouldn't be very noticeable. So it occurs to me that another chore that I'll have to take care of before we're done is I have to make the cutout and the holes for the boats for the table support leg, and we'll use the old floor as a template for that. Alright, so we have to go on and we have to do the side pieces, which will be much of the same, and I probably won't cover in much detail. So assembly of the aft sections of flooring is now also complete. The starboard section here features another access panel. I plan to install depth, speed, and water temperature instrument in this area, and that will provide access for that. We've also made the cutout to receive the table leg socket and the bolt holes for that. Those will get tapped with the 1/4 20 thread at the very end. And we've made screw holes to attach the floor to the stringers underneath. So what we have left to do is to sand the two aft sections smooth and then apply stain to all three sections. Something fairly light. So the forward finished flooring piece is now in place in the cabin, and we need to screw it down into the stringers, the fiberglass stringers towards the center of the boat and the wooden stringers on the outside edges. And we've got some screw holes started in the floor for that, but we need to drill pilot holes into the stringers, and then we can drive the screws home. So, and I was worried that the fiberglass wouldn't have really sufficient holding power to hold the screws well, but it does. And now we'll repeat the process with the side panels. And finally, the socket for the table leg. So here it is, our completed floor project, complete with bilge access and depth sounder access hatches. And that all came out pretty well, I think. So there are more projects in the works, and we hope to make videos about those. And hopefully they'll come out as nicely as this one did. So thanks for watching.